Good morning. Today, I shall be telling you about the historical background of the framing of our Constitution. Now, it all started in the year 1600 when the East India Company it got the exclusive rights to trade in eastern waters through a charter by the British Crown. After they got this permission, in the year 1608, the East India Company it came to India and started its trading activities. Now, at that point of time, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the French, they were already in the trading business with India. So the East India Company or the Britishers, they were having a stiff competition from all these foreign powers. And gradually, this competition progressed to the competition for territorial supremacy also. Now, in the year 1757, the Britishers they fought the famous Battle of Plassey with the Nawab of Bengal. And in this battle, the Britishers won. In its continuation, in the year 1765, there was a Treaty of Allahabad. And through this treaty, the Britishers got the Diwani. And Diwani means what? It was the right to collect revenue and do civil justice for Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. Now, once they got this Diwani, the Britishers, they progressed to become a territorial power. Now, in this one point that needs to be taken care of is that till the year 1707, the Mughals were very strong. And the Britishers or the East India Company, it could not move beyond the activity of trading. And once the Mughal Empire collapsed in this particular year, the Britishers got the opportunity to move beyond trading and start their activities towards ruling our country. So, after the year 1765, they moved further to acquire more territories. Now, in the year 1858, after the Sepoy Mutiny, British Crown took direct control over the administration of the territories which are occupied by the East India Company. And from then onwards, there was rule of the British Crown over the Indian territories from 1858 till 15th August 1947, the day we got independence. Now, after 15th August 1947, once India got independence, the first and foremost thing that was required for an independent country was Constitution. The point arises, why do we need a constitution for an independent country and why this is the most important aspect that is required for any country. So for that, you need to understand that constitution is the supreme law of the land. This is the supreme law of the land. And it comprises of rules which are acceptable by all the people of the country. It describes the powers of the government and the rights of the citizens. So, constitution, it builds up the trust among the people of the country. That's why constitution is the most important thing that is required for any independent country. Now, in order to frame the constitution, in the year 1946, a constituent assembly was formed. We got our constitution on 26th January 1950. Now here, the point to be noted is that the foundation of the constitution was laid during the British rule only. There was a sequence of events that happened during the British rule that laid the foundation of today's constitution. And these events, they can be classified into two phases. One phase is from 1773 to 1858 that we call as the company rule. And the next phase spans from 1858 to 1947 that we call as the Crown Rule. So we shall be taking up these phases one by one. So now let's recap what we have done till now. We started from the year 1600 when the East India Company, it got the rights to do trade in the eastern waters through a charter of the British Crown. In 1608, they came to India and started their trading activities. They continued their trading activities till the Mughals were strong till the year 1707. And after 1707, they started expanding their activities towards ruling the country. Then, next event happened in year 1767 with the Battle of Plassey, which they won. And then the Treaty of Allahabad in year 1765, through which they got the Diwani. Then year 1858, when the British Crown took direct control over the administration of the territories occupied by the East India Company in India. And from that time till the 15th August 1947, when we got independence, the British Crown continued its rule. And after that, there was framing of constitution, right? I told you what is the meaning of constitution. It is the supreme law of the land, and it tells us the rules which every person has to follow in the country, and it tells us about the powers of the government and rights of the citizens. And for framing the constitution, the Constituent Assembly was formed in year 1946, and constitution came into being on 26 January 1950. The foundation of the constitution was laid during the British rule, and in order to analyze the British rule, we need to divide into two phases. One phase was the company rule and other was the crown rule. That's what we have done till now. Now, proceeding further, in the year 1773, the event that happened was the Regulating Act. Now, before going to the Regulating Act, we need to understand what led to the enactment of this particular act. As I've already told you, that the East India Company started its activities with trading, but gradually it acquired Indian territories, and with that it was doing a double role, a double duty of trading also as well as of ruling also. Now, the British Crown was finding it hard to control the activities of the East India Company at that point of time. As per the charter, the East India Company had got the rights only to trade, right? But they expanded to ruling also. So now the British Crown was waiting for an opportunity to get hold of the administration of our country. And the British Crown was having that thought in the mind that whatever territories are being acquired by the East India Company, they are in the name of the British Crown only. So why they shouldn't have that control? Now, it was seen that the officers of the East India Company, they were basically merchants. Or traders, right? So they could hardly equal the task of administrators, right? And this was visible from the mismanagement and the corruption that was prevailing in the East India Company, in the working of the East India Company at that point of time. Now, the East India Company shareholders, they were demanding more dividends for them because they said that we are managing two affairs at the same time, trading as well as ruling. So our dividends should be increased. So that was a pressure on the British Parliament as well as the East India Company. And East India Company was also fighting so many wars, right? And all these expenses were being incurred from the Indian revenues only, whatever revenues they were getting at that point of time. So because of so much of expenses, the finances of the East India Company, they started going down. And a moment happened when the East India Company required a loan. So at that point of time, the East India Company asked for a loan of 14 lakh pounds from the British Parliament. And this was the opportunity that the British Parliament was looking for. So at that time, they said that, okay, we will give you this loan on the condition that the administration of India will be done as per our directions. So to facilitate the same, the Regulating Act of 1773 was enacted. Right? So this Regulating Act, we can say that this was the first step taken by the British Parliament to regulate the activities of the East India Company. That is evident from its name. First thing first, that they wanted also, they were looking for such a long time. Secondly, it acknowledged the political and administrative functions of the East India Company for the first time. And thirdly, and most important, I would say, it laid the foundation of a centralized administration in the country. It laid the foundation of centralized administration in the country, right? And how it happened? There were presidencies of Bombay, Bengal, and Madras. So out of these, all these presidencies, they were having their own governors. So what was done? The governor of Bengal, he was made as the governor general, and the governors of both Bombay and Madras, they were made subordinate to him, right? So these governors, they were asked to report to the governor general for all their activities. To assess the governor general, an executive council was formed comprising of 4 members. Right? And who was the first Governor General of Bengal? Lord Warren Hastings. Another development that happened was a Supreme Court was formed at Calcutta. It had 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Now, to add value to the working of the East India Company, the servants of the East India Company, they were asked not to accept any gifts or bribes from the natives. And lastly, it strengthened the control of the British Parliament over the East India Company by asking the Court of Directors of East India Company to report on its revenue, its civil and military affairs to the British Parliament from time to time. And who were the Court of Directors? The Court of Directors of the company, they were the governing body of the company. Governing body. Right? And I used the word shareholders earlier. Right? So these shareholders, they were also called as the Court of Proprietors. Now these Court of Proprietors, they appointed the Court of Directors for the company to govern the company. Right? So what were the main features of this regulating act? First thing is, it was the first step to regulate the activities of the East India Company. Secondly, it acknowledged the political and administrative functions of the East India Company. Thirdly, it laid the foundation of centralized administration in the country. Right? And what were the other features? The governor of Bengal, he was made as a governor general, right? And 4-member executive council was formed to assist him. governors of Bombay and Madras, they were made subordinate to him and they were asked to report to him. Supreme Court was formed at Calcutta with 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. And to add value to the working of the East India Company, the servants or the officers of the company, they were asked not to accept any gifts or bribes from the natives. And it strengthened the control of the British Parliament over the East India Company by asking the Court of Directors to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs from time to time. And who were the Court of Directors? They were the governing body of the East India Company, who were appointed by the shareholders of the company, who were also called as the Court of Proprietors. So, I hope the point is clear till now. This Regulating Act of 1773 had various drawbacks. First drawback was it deprived the Governor General of veto power. Veto means he will be having the final power to decide on any matter. So that power was not there. If he had in fact decided on some matter, if he has taken some decision, it could be overruled by the majority decision of the council, right? If the council's majority members, they take a decision that yes, this has to be done and we don't agree with the Governor General's decision, then they can overrule it. That was one of the flaws. Then next was the powers of the Supreme Court were ambiguous, right? There was no clear-cut demarcation of the powers of Supreme Court and the Governor General, which led to frequent conflicts between the Supreme Court and the Governor General. Other drawback was there was lack of parliamentary oversight. That means what? The British Parliament, it was not given clear-cut powers to scrutinize the reports which were sent by the Governor General about Indian affairs. So this led to inefficient, or we can say that this led to low accountability or lack of accountability and transparency in the governance of India, right? Because the British Parliament, it was not given that authority to scrutinize those reports. Otherwise, it would have taken cognizance of those matters and would have decided accordingly. So that was one of the drawbacks. Next point is there was inefficient provincial administration because there was now a centralized administration with the Governor General, right? And the governors of Bombay and Madras, they were supposed to report to him. This led to inefficient governance in those presidencies, right? So they were not able to take decisions on their own. The final decision rests with the Governor General. So these were some of the major drawbacks that were there of Regulating Act of 1773. To rectify these defects, Amending Act of 1781 was enacted, and this was also called as the Act of Settlement. So, how it rectified those defects? First and foremost thing, what it did was, it exempted the Governor General, his council, and the servants of the company from the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. all the acts done by them in their official capacity. Secondly, it excluded revenue matters and the matters related to revenue collection from the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. Thirdly, the Supreme Court was given the exclusive jurisdiction over the natives of Calcutta. And it was mentioned that those who would be tried, they would be tried as per their personal law. That means Hindus will be tried as per Hindu law and Muslims will be tried as per the Muslim law. Fourthly, it was mentioned that the appeals from the provincial court, they would be taken directly to the Governor General and not to the Supreme Court. Right? Because generally what happens? That in today's scenario, the appeal from the lower court goes to the higher court. But at that point of time, it was clearly mentioned that the appeals from the provincial court, they will be going to the Governor General and not to the Supreme Court. And lastly, the Governor General was given the authority to frame regulations for the provincial courts and the councils. So, it is evident from this act that as compared to the Supreme Court, the Governor General was given much more powers. He was made much more powerful as compared to the Supreme Court. So, now let's recap when we talk about the drawbacks of the Regulating Act. What we did? There was a lack of veto of the Governor General. His decisions could be overruled by the majority decisions of the Council. Secondly, there were ambiguous powers of the Supreme Court. It was not clearly defined, which led to the conflict between the Supreme Court and the Governor General. Thirdly, there was parliamentary oversight, or in fact, a lack of parliamentary oversight. The British Parliament was not given the powers to scrutinize the reports sent by the Governor General about the governance of India. Lack of accountability and transparency in the governance of India. And fourthly, because of the centralized administration, the governance of the provinces was badly affected. Right? In fact, it led to the inefficient administration of the provinces and corruption in those provinces. Next, it was mentioned that appeals from the provincial courts would be taken directly to the Governor General and not to the Supreme Court. And lastly, the Governor General was given the authority to frame regulations for the provincial courts as well as the councils. So this is how the provisions were made in the Amending Act of 1781. So that's all for this session. I shall be taking up Pitt's India Act of 1784 in the next session. Thank you.